Listen, just one more thing.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of episode 1 of season 5 of Columbo, Forgotten Lady. First broadcast on the 14th of September 1975 on NBC. It was written by William Driscoll, who had previously written the teleplay for Troubled Waters, and directed by returning director Harvey Hart. The episode begins at what appears to be the premiere of a movie, Song and Dance, with real-life variety columnist Army Archard playing himself, reporting from the premiere. From his description, the film appears to be a pastiche of That's Entertainment, and he speaks to two of the film's stars, Diamond and Wheeler, a dance duo in the vein of Fred and Ginger. Ned Diamond and Grace Wheeler are played by genuine Hollywood royalty John Payne and Janet Leigh. Payne was born on May the 23rd, 1912 in Virginia. He studied drama at Columbia and voice at Juilliard. To support himself, he worked as a wrestler before working on stage in a variety of touring shows, which got him noticed by Samuel Goldwyn's company, and being offered a movie contract there. He would make a few films in small roles before being signed to Warner Brothers, where he stayed for a few years, but was unhappy, so went to 20th Century Fox. Here he would appear in Stardust with Linda Darnell, the musical Tin Pan Alley with Alice Faye and Betty Grable, and Remember the Day with Claudette Colbert, amongst others, before being called up for service in World War II. After the war, he would again appear with Betty Grable in The Dolly Sisters, as well as in Razor's Edge with previous Columbo guest star Anne Baxter. His most well-known role was also his last for Fox, in 1947's Miracle on 34th Street, reuniting him with Maureen O'Hara, who he had appeared with in Sentimental Journey. After being released by Fox, he worked freelance in a series of film noirs and westerns, before contracting to Pine Thomas, where he managed to negotiate that all his films be made in colour, and the rights would revert to him after a few years, enabling him to sell them to the burgeoning television market. He would continue to make films for a variety of studios throughout the 50s before moving into some television roles. His appearance in this episode of Columbo was his last role before he retired. He died on December the 6th, 1989. He was 77. Janet Leigh was born Jeanette Morrison on July the 6th, 1927 in California. She grew up in the poverty caused by the Wall Street crash of 1929, but was discovered at age 18 when Norma Shearer was vacationing at the ski resort her parents worked and saw a photo of Leigh in a photo album at the resort. After arranging a screen test for Leigh at MGM, despite having no acting experience, and after some roles in radio dramas, she was cast in her first film, The Romance of Rosie Ridge, as the romantic interest of the star Van Johnson. She would then go from starring role to starring role, including the 1949 version of Little Women, Angels in the Outfield in 1951, and Scaramouche, alongside previous Columbo guest star Mel Ferrer. Her output at this time was prolific, and she was a huge star in huge films, both critically and commercially successful. In Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, and alongside her then husband, Tony Curtis in Houdini and the Vikings. But in 1960, her legacy was immortalised after being cast as Marion Crane in Hitchcock's Psycho, where former Columbo guest star Vera Miles played her sister. One of her last prominent film roles was in The Manchurian Candidate, with more previous Columbo guest stars Lawrence Harvey and James Gregory, although after this she would take a step back from acting to care for her young daughters. She would still appear in a variety of smaller film and television roles over the next 4 decades, including alongside her daughter Jamie Lee Curtis on a few occasions. Her appearance here in Columbo marks one of several one-off guest roles in television that would punctuate her later career. She died on October the 3rd, 2004. She was 77. The interview with Diamond and Wheeler is then shown to be on a TV screen as the camera reveals a man watching from his bed. This is Dr. Henry Willis, husband of Grace Wheeler, now Grace Wheeler Willis, and played by character actor Sam Jaffe, who has appeared in dozens of film and TV roles but will always be remembered by me as Bookman in Bedknobs and Broomsticks. He watches in shock and surprise as Grace announces her new Broadway show, which also appears to catch Ned Diamond off guard. On the limo ride home, Diamond and Wheeler discuss the new show, and he tries to gently dissuade her, but she's determined to make it work. She returns home and briefly speaks with her maid before taking a brandy and a pill up to her dressing room. Their chauffeur cum butler, Raymond, brings Dr. Willis a glass of milk, and Grace comes in, still giddy. She asks Raymond to get her one of her films ready to watch, and once he's gone, Dr. Willis tells her,
"I'm not investing $500,000 in a Broadway musical, Grace."
He says he's now a retired old man who simply can't finance her every whim. When he goes to the bathroom, she slips the pill she picked up into his drink before going to watch her film. The opening of this episode has a very different feel to previous episodes. Everything is done very subtly. On first viewing, it's not entirely clear exactly where our sympathies lie. Grace is not an egotistical diva type who is desperate to cling on to her fame. Her career has already faded, and she is genuinely enthusiastic about getting some sense of it back. And yet she suspected that her husband would not agree to finance her, so was prepared to do something about it the moment she got home. And Dr. Willis is not a controlling ogre who is attempting to manipulate her. He understands that they never married for love, but still cannot submit to her whims at his advanced age, but clearly has no idea what she's capable of. As an audience, we are still relatively neutral about who the villain is. Grace goes to watch an old film of hers, Walking My Baby Back Home, a real Janet Leigh film, but leaves the screening and collects a gun from her car. Alma the maid and Raymond the butler are watching Johnny Carson, and Grace returns in time for Raymond to change the reel on the projector. Using a real Janet Leigh film is such a nice touch of authenticity, similar to Anne Baxter's episode earlier, but it's used here to a much greater extent as it forms the basis of her alibi. I'm sure it also helps Janet Leigh to get into character. After Raymond has once again left the room, she slips out of her dress to reveal a full cat burglar outfit underneath, before she slips on some black gloves and sneaks up to her husband, who is now asleep, thanks to the drug she slipped him. She removes a file from his desk and places it on his chest before removing his glasses and placing the gun in his hand, which she then uses to shoot him, making it look a lot like a suicide. Downstairs, the help don't hear the shot over the sound of the television, which I'm not sure I completely believe, but I can let it go. Grace slips out of the room via the balcony, having locked the door behind her, and uses the tree to aid her return to the screening room. The reel she was watching has broken, and she is concerned that the film will now not end when Raymond expects it to. So she quickly recuts it and starts it playing before he comes in to change the reel, disposing of the cut frames. At the end of the film, Raymond checks on her and then goes to check on Dr. Willis, but of course there's no answer. We fade into Columbo, once again arriving at the scene, exhausted.
Gee, I forgot my jacket. That means I forgot my badge. I was dead asleep. I got here as fast as I could.
They're upstairs, Lieutenant.
He asks the maid for a cup of coffee and eventually makes his way to the crime scene, which everyone is convinced is suicide, based on how Grace had set the scene. She seems to have planned everything pretty well. Columbo then speaks to Raymond, and then questions the coroner as to why Willis would take sleeping pills just before he shot himself. The coroner says Willis was definitely holding the gun when he died, and Columbo checks out the balcony. There's some explanation as to how the shot wasn't heard due to the size of the house, which, okay, I guess I'll go with. And it's revealed the gun was kept in the car. Columbo is confused because no one got the impression that Willis was depressed, including his own doctor. His final act is to check the bottom of Willis's slippers, which are completely clean. The next morning, Ned Diamond arrives to comfort Grace. He tells her he's arranged to postpone their show, but she insists on it going ahead. Columbo arrives. While he's waiting to see Grace, Columbo spots Ned on the phone and goes to speak with him. Ned thinks Columbo's open notebook is an autograph book and duly signs before Columbo speaks with him, and professes how thrilled he is to meet him. So maybe it was an autograph book. Columbo says he has a few loose ends to tie up before eliciting some dancing advice from Ned. He eventually goes to see Grace and realises who she is and is completely starstruck. Falk's performance is so good here, it's hard to tell if Columbo is being genuine or if this is to off-balance Grace. It certainly appears genuine. He eventually questions her about his loose ends, if her husband took the sleeping pills before he decided to kill himself, how did he go get the gun? If he already planned to do it, why did he take the sleeping pills? Unlike most murderers in the show, she doesn't necessarily give an explanation. She just says that she can't understand how it could be anything else than what it appears to be. They go to the crime scene and she explains that no one could have climbed up the tree to get in.
Some time ago, Henry had all those lower branches cut away so no one could get up.
Or have got in any other way. Raymond comes in and lets her know her vocal coach is there, which confuses her as he normally comes on a Friday, and Raymond exclaims that it is Friday. She tells Columbo she's been very forgetful lately and then invites him and his wife to one of Grace's film screenings. He then takes one last look at the balcony before going to see Willis's doctor again. The doctor explains Willis's medical issues were not too severe, and as a doctor himself he would have known that. As Columbo leaves the hospital, he's accosted by a uniformed officer who says he hasn't done a firearms test in 6 years and is required to do one every 6 months. He insists this is a mistake. Of course, we know this is because Columbo doesn't carry a gun, or particularly light guns. But that's no excuse for the department, and he might be required to go to the shooting range for a test. We also discover that he's really at the station, and he gives a great excuse for this.
Well, I don't get down there too much. None of the murders take place there, you know.
Columbo goes to check when Dr. Willis purchased certain books he was reading, and then to a rehearsal of Grace's new show. She's struggling with the choreography, and on a break, Columbo asks why Willis hadn't marked his page after he had finished reading the night he died. She again has no explanation, and again reiterates that if he didn't kill himself, who would possibly want to kill him? Essentially, she is implicating only herself by saying this, as she is the only one with any kind of motive. But as she's the one saying this, it appears to suggest to Columbo that she didn't do it. When he leaves the rehearsal, he is accosted by another uniformed officer who says there was a mistake and it's actually been 10 years since he took the firearms test. After assuring this officer he would be there the next day, he goes to see Raymond the butler to find out the timings of everything that happened on the night of the murder. While this happens, Grace and Ned talk about the show over lunch. and she reveals her anger over how his drinking and a car accident ended her career, as well as his, and he reveals,
I loved you. I wanted to marry you.
And now?
I still feel the same.
It's a very emotional scene between the two, and has a self-referential, reflective quality that was very rare for TV shows at the time. It's something we're more used to in modern TV, but would have been fairly revolutionary at the time. Columbo is accosted again, this time by Internal Affairs, who tell him that he has to take his firearms test that afternoon or he'll lose his badge. Grace is hosting a party and is encouraged to give an impromptu preview of the show she's doing with Ned for the assembled guests. Columbo arrives and sneaks past this performance, enjoying it as he goes, to inspect the crime scene yet again. He notices that the balcony can't be reached by climbing up the tree, but that you can get from the balcony to the ground using the tree to help. He is interrupted by Dog while he's testing this theory, and unlike the last time Columbo did a stunt in Greenhouse Jungle, this time it appears to be a stuntman in Falk's place, which is probably a good thing. We then cut to Ned's studio, where Columbo has arranged to meet Ned and a mysterious man, who we find out Columbo is paying to take his firearms test for him, as he can't hit the target. Columbo speaks to Ned and tells him Willis didn't kill himself. Columbo is convinced that he had no reason to do so, and Grace killed him. With what we know now about mental health, this reasoning wouldn't necessarily stand up as well today. At one time there were many cases where it was unfathomable that somebody who appeared perfectly content killed themselves for no apparent reason, and it was often suspected of being foul play, despite the fact that it was indeed a suicide. But with a greater understanding of depression, we now know that stress can be a trigger, but thoughts of suicide often defy logical external reasons. I don't think this completely ruins Columbo's theory, as the circumstances around the death are still incongruous. As we discover, the autopsy has found much higher traces of the sleeping pills than Willis should have had. Ned refuses to accept any of this. In his defence of Grace, he is now taking on the role of the murderer, where they usually attempt to offer explanations for the inconsistencies. Columbo says her motive was to ensure funding for the show, which her husband would not provide, and Ned still refuses to accept it, having known and loved her for so long. Columbo says he's going to a screening at her house that night, and Ned should really be there. That night, Grace is getting ready and is excited to welcome Columbo and his wife, who, you don't have to be a genius to work out, can't attend, but Columbo arrives and he's in his tuxedo. This is quite a moment in the show, and the smartest he has looked so far. It shows that he clearly thinks a lot of Grace, even though he's convinced she murdered her husband. He's phoned ahead and asked to watch Walking My Baby Back Home, and explains to Ned that he doesn't understand how a film that is an hour and 45 minutes took 2 hours to play on the night of the murder. Raymond's already confirmed this. The only explanation is that the film broke, but it's unlikely to have taken that long to repair it. They sit to watch the film, and it breaks during the opening credits, which takes Grace only a few moments to repair. The only explanation for the film lasting longer than it should have done is that she wasn't there when the film broke. Ned seems to silently accept this explanation, but Columbo says he has a problem. He has discovered that Dr. Willis was aware that Grace has an inoperable brain aneurysm, causing her memory problems, and the strain of performing in a show would have killed her, which is the real reason he didn't want to finance the show. Columbo's not even sure she remembers killing Dr. Willis. Grace overhears them talking about Willis's murder and gets angry at Columbo for claiming it wasn't a suicide. At this point, Ned says that he killed Willis, for Grace's sake, and sits her back down to watch the rest of the film. Columbo escorts him out and says it won't take much to break his confession.
It might take a couple of months.
Indicating that Grace will have died by the time he's off the hook. This is an incredible episode of Columbo. So different from what we've seen before, but with enough familiarity in it not to feel out of place in the series. The way it keeps just enough information from the audience to take us on an emotional roller coaster is quite brilliant, making Grace somewhat sympathetic, and yet also not throughout until the final gut punch of the reveal of her condition, while making her husband appear not necessarily monstrous, but at the very least unreasonable, lacking empathy, until the final reveal. It has the humorous moments we expect from a Columbo episode, as well as some mildly unscrupulous behaviour from Columbo regarding his issue with guns. But that is very much to lure you into thinking of this as just a regular episode, while seeding the hints towards Grace's condition throughout. John Payne and Janet Leigh are fantastic, perfectly cast as the ageing stars at slightly different stages of acceptance of their career waning. And it's really interesting way to present this commentary on the older actors of Hollywood. It's not what I normally like about Columbo, but it's done so well and is so entertaining, I have to give it 5 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.